Hello, welcome to today's edition of the Academy. Now in this edition we're going to cover we're going to start covering a couple topics related to the whole idea of area denial. Now there's two halves of this coin, the way I want to look at it. So two separate videos. The first we're going to look at is area denial as far as preventing the enemy's occupation with your own occupation, right? Your own presence. The second we're going to try is the use of weapons to deny an area to an opponent. Okay? So this particular concept is probably not best explained and expounded on in, a face-to-camera video. So let's head down to the tabletop and let's see what this whole thing is about area denial. All right? Let's go. Alright, so let's take a look at area denial in its most simplistic form in deployment. That's really where you need to start thinking about this. Alright, so in this particular setup, I've actually deployed roughly 400 points of models on the table, and I was able to basically deny the entire deployment area to my opponent. And I'll explain how that works. Now if you'll notice, this unit is deployed in sort of a U fashion. And their location isn't chosen at random. It's chosen very specifically for what it is doing. You see, it's much more spread out. It's not compact. It's not really what you do use for a firing line. Okay. Whether you go first or second doesn't matter in the deployment side. Obviously, if you go second, you are at a slightly more advantaged position because you'll be able to respond after your first move. Now, whether you go first or second matters a little bit. We're going to assume here you are going first, okay? Because that's the worst case scenario in this. Now, this is only 400 points to your army, so it's not going to be everything. Your big hitters are going to be elsewhere. So, let's take a quick look at this deployment. Alright, so what I've done is found the corner of the table and moved in just a shade under 10 inches in from the corner. Okay, the reason for that is the opponent can only place models over 9 inches away from you. So if he can place a model here in this 1 square inch, you have to make sure that this is no more than 9 inches apart. So 10 inches from the corner puts him within 9 inches. So here's a model placed exactly on the corner. And as you can see, if I place this exactly at the base, he is not less than 9 inches away. In fact, I could have moved him out a little bit more, but that's irrelevant at this point. Don't really need to be that specific or that exact. But this no longer can deploy a single model, let alone a full unit. Because he's on a diagonal within 9, this is well covered. And you've got 3 models here. Out here, to a model depth, or in depth of 9 inches, shows you where the opponent cannot deploy first turn. Or sorry, not deploy, but cannot deep strike in through any special rule. They're going to have to start outside of this area. Of course, they could charge in, but still, we're looking at trying to prevent them, keep them as far back as you can. In the center, I've got a single line of 10 crew. Now, I've kept all the units at 10-man minimums, or 10 mans, no larger, no smaller, because most armies have at least one 10-man unit. So some of them do not have options for larger. So here's 10, Kroot, all the way up the deployment line. So again, 9 inches deep, area denied. Over here, a mirror image of the other squad, 10 Fire Warriors, does the same thing. Keeps this whole section clear with the same 9-inch refusal zone here. Now, I just placed one hammerhead here, and there's a devilfish with troops in here, just kind of to show the position. And a key element of one of the abilities that many armies have before the game begins. But before we do that, let's talk about what happens if you're a first turn. If you have first turn, you don't really want to move these units because he especially is securing the back corner to keep anyone from coming to your back line. If you move them up into range of combat or try to consolidate or whatever, you start to lose space that you're denying. You don't want to do that. Here, again, if you move forward, yes, you're pushing that bubble further forward, but at a cost of potentially having stuff open up back here. So you have to be very careful how you do that. Very important to have some large models or units in the back just for that purpose. I'll explain more in a second on that. Of course, mirror image on this side. Now going first, that means you're not going to have a lot of good shooting from these types of units because they're probably not going to move forward much. You're going to rely on the other units that are not tasked with holding your deployment zone secure to do all the firing. Okay, so let's talk about what happens if you go second. This is actually much more beneficial for you because the opponent can't bring in anything that drops in turn 1 in your deployment zone at all, and yet in your turn you're free to move, so you'll be able to gauge whether or not you can move these units out of their role of area denial. If the opponent has deep strike or places all of his units in reserve or his special deep strike rules, allowing them to come in on turn 1, and he places all of them, on your turn 1, none of these units have to remain in place because he has had to deploy all those units outside of your entire deployment zone. In fact, he's going to be stuck really marching them across the field to get to you. Now, if you did go first, or have the special rules similar to what Kroot do, or Pathfinders, allowing them to, prior to the first turn, get a free movement, let's see what happens. Alright, so there the Kroot moved up 7 inches. Pathfinders can similarly do that, and I chose, in this instance, to only advance the center. I didn't want to explore the possibilities of advancing flanks only or what have you. You get the idea, and you can apply it to your tactics, you know, in whatever game you want to play. But here's the deal. Now, after that pre-first turn move, the opponent now cannot deep strike anything in this section. He's actually been deprived of part of his half of the table. Now, this is a huge empty area back here, and this die represents 9 inches straight back from this. That die, however, is still well within 9 inches of both the Hammerhead and this Fire Warrior. As you can see, there's less than 8, and there's less than 8. So, even though he's moved forward and opened this whole space up, the opponent can't drop his units here. So though it looks empty, it's not exposed to the opponent's deep strike. So that's a key principle in working this area denial thing out. You want to move out deliberately so that you can ensure the opponent cannot place anything in your back lines and harass you. Force them to deploy out here. So let's take a look at what a 1500 point list-ish might look like in this deployment zone prior to a game with the initial Kroot move in place. Okay, so I didn't cost out exactly at 1500, but just to show you kind of what the rest of your line might look like, figure I'd throw a dedicated transport in this end to pick up and maneuver these models as quickly as I can so that once they're done doing their area denial mission, they can be brought to whatever part of the combat is important. Of course, their commander's got to be in there somewhere, supporting some heavy guns and more heavy guns. Figured you might as well start your units out where they can shoot, and whether you're going first or second, and then instead of deep striking these, this just represents what you might put on the board instead of bringing them in through some special rules. Again, another dedicated transport to help swiftly reposition these models if needed. But So that's generally what it would look like. Now, obviously, having terrain, especially impassable terrain dotting the landscape, is going to influence how you can place these models on the board. But it doesn't eliminate the effect or even the need to plan for this. Matter of fact, if you have some terrain that's impassable that would actually put a gap in your line, it's extremely important to counter that or account for that. And in fact, if you have a unit such as the Kroot or the Pathfinders that can get that free move ahead of time, you could position them such that they could move around that unit, that obstacle, and extend the line forward on the other side of that impassable terrain. So some things to think about in there. So this is how you deal, or an example of how you can use the concept of area denial by placement of your units. There's one other aspect of area denial where you're dealing with unit placement. So let's look at that. Okay, so let's say you got this, just a few obstacles in the way and between you and your opponent. Your opponent's got a bike unit that he's trying to charge in and get to some of your heavy stuff. Well, the concept of area denial here deals with disallowing his freedom of movement, or even slowing him down. You can almost consider it part of bubble wrapping, but bubble wrapping doesn't quite cover it completely. Now we're going to assume this piece of terrain is impassable, just to get the point here. So what you would do to deny an avenue of attack, especially if his bikes are here, they're set to go after your, let's say that's long strike over there. You got some crisis suits that can probably do some damage to. Definitely don't want to get into your back line and start wreaking havoc, especially considering you have some fragile fire warriors and your broadside's back there. So you'll block, just assuming even a 10-man unit of Kroot, straight across in 2 lines. This prevents them from potentially shooting a hole all the way through it, because you'll be able to remove models in any order you want. Removing models out of coherency is entirely possible, because next time you move, you're going to just put yourself in a position to continue blocking that. So being here, he will not be able to move forward. He's blocked. You've denied that avenue from him. If you were to charge in, that will pull these units forward into close combat, and they may survive. The second row, assuming they die, the second row would remain there and prevent the second movement in there. So you delay them for 2 turns while everything back there can take shots at those bikers. If these were in position still, there's some survivors. Let's say during the close combat that 4 of them were left, and after all the rolls, you'd back away so they can't shoot. They're just falling back. That allows this entire string here to still, while blocking advance, shoot and do some damage, allowing all of these units also to shoot. The opponent still cannot charge through because he has to deal with both lines. And so if he decides to charge this line now, which is entirely possible, they're locked in combat and will probably end up getting decimated pretty bad. This one can come in and hold them up too. So there's a few different ways to block the opponent's advance through this. That is how you can use a unit to prevent the movement of an opponent's unit through a gap in terrain. Now, with some systems where there's no limits to or impact about terrain on movement, this is really your only option. In situations where the game system calls for effects of terrain, so for example, the units going over this might move at half speed, or you might have to climb, call the distance vertically counted as well as going forward. Doing this is still an area denial in the sense that it prevents the opponent from moving up the shortest route. Everything here is shorter or slower and can be countered. So that's the concept of area denial by position. Position is a key piece. In fact, we even use the position here to set us up for next week's topic, which is area denial by firepower. And to give you a hint, as this unit backed away from the close combat it might have been in to allow the opponent's units to be freed to be fired upon, that area can be focused down with all of these units firing into that spot, making it a pretty dangerous place to be. Alright, so there you have it. That's the concept of area denial by using your own units strategically placed to prevent the enemy, the opponent, from enacting their plan to take certain spaces that are important to you for whatever reason. Okay? So hope you liked that. Hope you learned something. If you did, let me know below. Please share, like, and subscribe, and we'll see you in the next edition of the Academy. Bye-bye.